My name is Leah Kendall, and I was 41 years old when my mother put a price on my place in our family. It happened on Thanksgiving Day, in my parents' house in Holland, Michigan, while rain tapped softly against the dining room windows and 18 relatives sat around a table crowded with turkey, sweet potatoes, green bean casserole, and all the little traditions that used to make that room feel safe. My mother, Monica, stood at the head of the table with her wineglass in both hands, smiling the way she smiled when she had already decided how everyone else was supposed to feel. She talked about gratitude. She talked about sacrifice. She talked about how family shows up when it matters. Then she turned to me. My sister Savannah was getting married at Harborstone Resort in June, she said, and the total package came to $121,600. The room went quiet, but not surprised. That was when I understood they had all heard this before I had. My mother said I was the stable one. No husband, no children, no real obligations, as if my quiet life made it public property. She said Savannah deserved one beautiful day, and I was in a position to give it to her. Before I could answer, my father pushed back his chair and stood. Howard Kendall never shouted. He did something worse. He made disappointment sound like a verdict. If you can't stand with your sister now, he said, don't expect this family to stand with you later. I looked around the table at the faces, waiting for me to surrender. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. What they didn't know was that by Sunday afternoon, I would come back to that house with the one woman Savannah had begged me never to call. I drove back to Grand Rapids, with my coat still buttoned and cranberry sauce turning sour in my throat. The highway was slick from rain, the kind of late November rain that makes every passing headlight smear across the windshield. My phone started lighting up before I reached Zealand. First my mother, then my father, then Savannah. Then relatives who usually remembered I existed only when someone needed a ride, a receipt, or a quiet person to absorb the tension. I let every call go unanswered. Each flash of the screen lit the passenger seat for half a second, like someone striking a match in the dark. By the time I pulled into my townhouse complex, there were 26 missed calls. I sat in the car with both hands still on the wheel, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I expected shame to arrive first. It didn't. What came instead was a clean, steady anger, not loud enough to scare me, but sharp enough to keep me awake. Inside, I hung my damp coat over a kitchen chair and set the phone face down on the counter. It kept buzzing. The sound traveled through the wood like a trapped insect. I made tea and forgot to drink it. Around midnight, the voicemails started stacking up. My Aunt Marlene said my mother was devastated. Cousin Grant said I was embarrassing Savannah. 2 women from my parents' church left messages about forgiveness, generosity, and how a sister should never make money the center of a wedding. One of them had not spoken to me since the last family funeral. By 6 the next morning, there were 89 missed calls and 37 voicemails. I sat at my kitchen table in the gray light, before sunrise, and scrolled through the list. Mother, father, Savannah, Aunt Marlene, Cousin Grant, church friends, a neighbor from the old subdivision. They had not all woken up with the same thought in their hearts. This had been arranged. My mother had made a phone tree out of my refusal, assigning grief the way she used to assign casseroles for school fundraisers. I opened a notebook from the drawer and drew 5 columns across the first page. Caller, time, duration, message, pressure tactic. I wasn't building a case yet, not exactly. I was doing what I had always done when a room became too loud to breathe in. I organized it. I turned panic into rows. I turned guilt into data. They thought silence meant I was breaking, but silence is what I do before I read the file. At work, every review begins the same way. I look for the pattern before I trust the story. In my family, the pattern had a name, and her name was Savannah. My sister was 34, beautiful in the polished way of women who know exactly where the light is. She had soft blonde waves, a careful laugh, and the ability to make every room feel like it had been waiting for her entrance. People called her sensitive, creative, tender-hearted. When she forgot to pay rent, my mother said Savannah was overwhelmed. When she maxed out a credit card on outfits for a branding shoot, my father said she was investing in herself. When her bridal consulting studio, Pearl and Pine Events, folded after 18 months, everyone called it brave. Not failed, brave. That word never belonged to me. I was practical, reliable, low maintenance. The kind of daughter who could be counted on not to ask for anything because asking would confuse the role I had been assigned. I went to community college for 2 years. Because it was cheaper. I transferred to a state school, worked evenings in a billing office, and ate dinner more times than I can count in my parked car under the yellow light behind the hospital. I bought my first interview blazer from a clearance rack and learned to hem the sleeves myself because paying a tailor felt reckless. When I graduated, my parents sent a card with $50 inside and a note that said, "We always knew you'd figure it out." By the time Savannah announced she had found her calling, I was 31. She got candles, flowers, a cake with gold lettering, and my mother crying into a linen napkin because her youngest was finally becoming who she was meant to be. I remember standing near the kitchen sink that night, rinsing wine glasses, while everyone toasted Savannah's future. No one asked about mine. I told myself it didn't matter. I was too old to want applause for surviving, but some part of me still noticed. Over the years, the numbers attached themselves quietly to memory. $58,400 in rent and apartment fees. $22,750 in car lease payments and insurance. $33,200 in credit card rescues. Then there was the collapse of Pearl and Pine, the one my parents called a soft landing. I did not know the number then. I would later. My family never called Savannah expensive. They called her delicate. They never called me neglected. They called me strong. And strength, in our house, was just another word for someone they thought they could empty, without hearing a sound. Grandma Eleanor was the only person in my family who never mistook quiet for empty. She noticed things other people walked past. A missing receipt. A tired smile. A child standing at the sink while everyone else sat in the warm center of the room. When I was 10, she started letting me sit beside her at the kitchen table on Saturday mornings while she balanced the church accounts. Her house was small, yellow-sided, and always smelled like coffee, cinnamon, and the vanilla she kept in a cabinet above the stove. Outside, Lake Michigan wind rattled the windows. Inside, Grandma laid envelopes in neat stacks and taught me that money had a memory if you respected it enough to write things down. She never made numbers feel cold. She made them feel honest. She would slide a pencil into my hand and say, "A gift should leave both people lighter, Leah. A debt gets heavier every time someone pretends it isn't there." Then she would show me how to match deposits with offering envelopes, how to circle an error without shame, how to ask a question without accusing anyone. Those mornings were the first place I learned that truth did not need to be cruel. It just needed to be complete. My mother never liked that about her. Monica trusted feelings when feelings gave her control, and silence when facts became inconvenient. Grandma trusted records. She kept grocery lists from 1998, tax folders labeled by year, birthday cards tied with ribbon, and recipe cards written in blue ink so careful it looked stitched onto the paper. Her lemon pound cake recipe had 3 versions because she believed even sweetness needed revision. The last time I saw her alive, she was in a hospice bed near the window, smaller than I remembered but still wearing lipstick. I brought her tulips. She complained they were too expensive, then smiled because she knew I had bought them anyway. Before I left, she pointed toward the closet and told me there was a wooden recipe box with my name taped underneath. "Not today," she said. "When you're ready." I asked ready for what? She touched my wrist with 2 fingers and said, "You'll know the difference between a gift and a debt when it matters." After the funeral, Aunt Beatrice handed me the box wrapped in a dish towel. I put it on the top shelf of my pantry and left it there for months. Sometimes, when I reached for flour or coffee filters, I would see the corner of it and feel something in my chest pull tight. I thought she had left me recipes. I didn't know she had left me a witness. I opened Grandma's recipe box 2 nights after Thanksgiving, after my father sent an email with no greeting and no softness in it. He wrote that Savannah only got one wedding, that my mother had cried herself sick, and that I was confusing money with love. At the bottom, he typed the same message he had delivered at the table, only stripped down to its ugliest form. You owe your sister this. I read it once, closed my laptop, and stood in the kitchen for a full minute before I reached for the pantry shelf. The wooden box was heavier than I expected. Dust came off on my fingers. The tape with my name on it had yellowed at the edges, but Grandma's handwriting was still clear, leaning slightly to the right like it was trying to move forward without me. Inside, the top layer was exactly what I thought it would be. Lemon pound cake, chicken and dumplings, Christmas sugar cookies with a note in the corner that said, "Chill the dough, no shortcuts." Under the cards was a photograph of me at 8 years old, sitting beside her with a calculator in my lap. I almost closed the box and let her stay only sweet. But beneath the photograph was a sealed envelope marked Leah, not before you're ready. My hands were steady when I opened it. The first page was from Great Lakes Community Credit Union, 2 education CDs inside a family education trust, opened by Eleanor Price, with my parents listed as custodial trustees. Leah M. Kendall, $52,000. Savannah R. Kendall, $52,000. Equal. The next statement was dated 4 years later. Savannah's balance was still $52,000. Mine was $31,400. The last statement was worse. Savannah, $52,000. Leah, 0. I stared at that number until it stopped looking like a number and started looking like a room where something had been removed. Beneath the statements were 3 withdrawal authorization forms. Monica Kendall, Howard Kendall. Their signatures sat at the bottom of each page, neat and legal. The memo line read family education and emergency support. I checked the dates. Once, twice, then I knew. Those withdrawals matched the months Pearl and Pine events collapsed, the months Savannah needed what everyone kept calling a soft landing. My future had been softened into hers. My mother had signed away my money, with the same hand she used to write love, Mom on birthday cards. I did not call her. I did not call Savannah. I opened my laptop and created a new file. Kendall Family Financial Compliance Review. The next morning, I went to work because work was where fraud at least had a procedure. At the hospital system, people did not get to say, "We meant well," and make a missing authorization disappear. A charge needed a code. A signature needed a date. A claim needed support. By 10:30, I had 3 monitors open, a mug of coffee gone cold, and the Kendall Family Financial Compliance Review saved in a password-protected folder on my personal laptop at home. I told myself I was compartmentalizing. Really, I was waiting for the next document to find me. It arrived at 11:17 a.m. from a woman named Jocelyn Pike at Harborstone Resort. The subject line read, "Sponsor Confirmation Kendall. Arden Wedding." For a second, I thought it was spam, the kind of mistake that happens when wedding vendors copy the wrong family member. Then I saw the first line, "Dear Leah, thank you for agreeing to serve as the primary family sponsor for Savannah and Caleb's June celebration. Attached, please find the final confirmation form required to secure the lakeside ballroom package." I stopped breathing in the quiet way. People stop breathing when their body understands danger before their mind finishes reading. I opened the attachment. There it was, in clean resort font, under financial responsibility. Primary family sponsor. Leah M. Kendall. Estimated package total, $121,600. Deposit due, the 15th of January 2025. Remaining balance due, the 30th of May, 2025. Beneath that was a blank signature line waiting for me, as if my consent were just a clerical detail running a little late. I had never spoken to Jocelyn Pike. I had never toured Harborstone. I had never promised a deposit, reviewed a contract, chosen a ballroom, or agreed to attach my name to anything with Savannah's wedding on it. But someone had already placed me in the file, not as a sister, not as a guest, as a funding source. I read the PDF again, slower this time, the way I read disputed hospital charges when a patient swears they never received the service. The language was polite. The implication was not. Savannah had not been asking me for help. She had been building a payment plan around my surrender. I typed my response carefully. Jocelyn, please be advised that I have not agreed to sponsor, fund, guarantee, or otherwise assume financial responsibility for this event. Do not list me as sponsor. Please preserve all prior communications in which my name was used regarding payment or sponsorship. I read it twice, removed the sentence that sounded angry, and sent it. Then I opened my review file and created a new section. Unauthorized sponsorship representation. By the time I got home that evening, Jocelyn had replied with the careful tone of a woman who had just realized a polite email might become evidence. She apologized for the confusion and attached the message thread Savannah had sent her. I stood in my kitchen with my coat still on, reading my sister's words on my phone. Leah is handling the family side. She's private about money, but she wants this to be special for me. Please keep her listed as primary sponsor until she signs. There was no hesitation in it. No misunderstanding. Savannah had not hoped I would help. She had told strangers I already had. I sat down before my knees decided for me. Then I called Caleb. He answered on the fourth ring, cheerful at first, then cautious when he heard my voice. I did not accuse him. I did not ask where Savannah was. I asked one question. Did Savannah tell you I offered to pay for the wedding? Silence moved through the line, heavy and slow. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all its shine. She said you wanted to. She said it was important to you. Some kind of sister thing. I closed my eyes. Sister thing. That was what my life had become when Savannah needed it to sound pretty. I asked if his family had offered to contribute. Caleb exhaled once, sharp enough that I heard it break. He said his mother had offered to cover most of their side months ago, but Savannah told them the Kendalls had a tradition. The older sister gave the wedding as a blessing. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. Traditions are supposed to come from history. Savannah had invented one out of my bank account. Caleb gave me his mother's number without argument. Claudia Arden answered like she was stepping out of a meeting, calm, direct, not unkind. I introduced myself, and before I finished, she said, I wondered when you were going to call. That sentence told me enough to sit down again. Claudia explained that the Ardens had offered to pay 60% of the wedding, $72,960, because they could afford it, and because Caleb was their only son. Savannah refused. Then she sent Claudia an email saying I wanted to cover the full package to prove I still belonged in my own family. Claudia forwarded it while we were still on the phone. I read the line twice. My sister has always been the provider type. This is her way of showing she still belongs. For the first time all week, my anger went completely quiet. I had spent my life being useful. Savannah had turned usefulness into a costume and dressed me in it without asking. Claudia asked what I planned to do. I looked at Grandma's recipe box on the counter and said, Sunday, 2 o'clock, my parents' house. They think they're holding a family meeting. There was a pause. Then Claudia said, Then I'll be there. After Claudia agreed to come, I did not sleep much. Not because I was afraid of the meeting, but because every document in front of me had changed shape. The recipe box was no longer a keepsake. Jocelyn's email was no longer a misunderstanding. Claudia's forwarded message was no longer family gossip. Together, they formed something I recognized from work, a pattern of representation without consent. At the hospital, that kind of pattern could trigger audits, repayments, sometimes terminations. In my family, it had always triggered casserole, tears, and someone telling me to be the bigger person. I made coffee at 5:12 the next morning and opened the Kendall Family Financial Compliance Review. I did not build it like a revenge folder. I built it like a report someone else might have to read without me in the room. Section 1 was Grandma Eleanor's Education Trust, the original $52,000 for each granddaughter, the later statements, the withdrawal forms, the signatures. Section 2 was Savannah's documented support history, the rent, the car payments, the credit card rescues, each line dated when I could verify it, and marked estimated when I could not. Section 3 was Pearl and Pine events, not because I wanted to humiliate Savannah, but because the timing mattered. Section 4 was Harborstone Resort and the unauthorized sponsor listing. Section 5 was Claudia Arden's email, confirming the offer Savannah had declined. Section 6 was the final comparison, the page I stared at the longest. Savannah had received or protected $166,350 in family support, still had her $52,000 from Grandma's trust, had benefited from the $52,000 taken from mine, and had turned down $72,960 from the Ardens, before asking me for another $121,600. I did not write the word unfair anywhere. I did not need to. The arithmetic did that by itself. By Saturday night, the report was 9 pages long. I printed 9 copies at the office supply store because my home printer had started leaving pale lines through every page, and pale lines felt wrong for something that needed to be clear. I bought blue binder clips, a pack of sticky tabs, and a plain folder the color of hospital forms. Back home, I photographed every page, uploaded the files to cloud storage, and emailed a copy to myself. Then I set my charcoal blazer over the kitchen chair, placed Grandma's recipe box beside the folder, and looked at them both for a long time. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for a review. A fight needs volume. A review needs evidence. Sunday arrived cold and bright, the kind of Michigan winter day that looks clean until you step into it and feel the air cut through your coat. I drove to Holland with the folder on the passenger seat and Grandma's recipe box resting behind it, both of them buckled in like witnesses. My mother had sent the meeting text the night before with her usual authority, Sunday, 2 o'clock. Your father and I expect you here. We are settling this as a family. She did not ask if I was available. Monica Kendall never asked questions when a command would do. I parked at 1:58. Behind Aunt Beatrice's Buick, and Caleb's silver truck. Through the front window, I could see the living room lamps glowing, and the shape of people already arranged inside. That was my mother's gift, arranging a room so it looked accidental. I carried the folder under one arm, and the recipe box against my ribs, where my heartbeat knocked once against the wood before I reached the porch. Howard opened the door. He looked at the box first, then at me. Your mother's in the living room, he said. No hug, no hello. Just direction. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon rolls, the kind my mother made when she wanted conflict to look like hospitality. Savannah sat on the couch beside Caleb, her eyes already pink, a tissue folded neatly in one hand. Monica sat in the armchair near the fireplace, ankles crossed, cardigan buttoned, every inch of her prepared. Aunt Beatrice was near the window, quiet, purse in her lap. Cousin Laurel stood by the mantel with her arms folded. Uncle Martin had taken the recliner like a judge, too tired to wear robes. My mother looked at the folder and sighed as if I had brought a weapon to church. Leah, she said, we are not here to make this uglier. I set the recipe box on the coffee table. Neither am I. For the first 10 minutes, they followed the script so closely I could have mouthed the lines with them. Savannah said she never meant to hurt me. Monica said I was punishing my sister for needing help. Howard said ability came with responsibility. Laurel said weddings were emotional. Martin said money could be earned back, but family could not. I listened. I let every sentence settle. Then I placed one hand on the folder and said, before I answer any of that, someone else deserves to hear what has been said in her name. My mother frowned. Savannah went still. I walked to the front door and opened it. Claudia Arden stepped inside, calm in a gray wool coat, holding a white folder of her own. Caleb stood so fast the coffee table trembled. Savannah's face lost every bit of color. Claudia did not raise her voice. That was the first thing I noticed. She stepped into my parents' living room, removed her gloves slowly, and looked at Savannah with the calm expression of a woman who had spent a lifetime discussing money without pretending it was impolite. "I'm sorry to come without being formally invited," she said. "But since my family's name has been used in this conversation, I think I should hear it directly. My mother recovered first. She always did." "This is really a Kendall matter," Monica said, her smile tight enough to crack. Claudia nodded once. "It became an Arden matter when Savannah told us Leah was paying because your family had a tradition." Caleb turned toward Savannah. "You said they all agreed." Savannah looked at him, then at me, then down at the tissue in her hand as if it might offer instructions. "I didn't say it like that." Claudia opened her white folder and placed one printed email on the coffee table beside Grandma's recipe box. "This is what you wrote to me on October 17th. No one moved. Even the house seemed to hold still. Caleb picked up the page. I watched his eyes travel across the lines, watched the moment he reached the sentence I had read twice in my kitchen. "My sister has always been the provider type. This is her way of showing she still belongs." His hand lowered slowly. "Savannah," he said, and her name sounded different in his mouth, less like affection and more like evidence. Savannah's face folded. "I was trying to make everything work." Claudia's tone stayed even. "We offered to pay 60% of the wedding. $72,960. You refused." Aunt Beatrice inhaled sharply near the window. My father stared at Savannah, not with anger yet, but with the confusion of a man watching the story he had defended begin to rot from the inside. Monica leaned forward. "This is between sisters." I heard myself answer before anyone else could. "No, this stopped being between sisters when my name became a payment method." The room went silent after that. Not peaceful silent, exposed silent. Savannah began to cry, but this time the tears did not move people the way they usually did. Caleb set the email back on the table and pulled his hand away from hers. It was a small movement. Barely anything. But in that room, it sounded like a door closing. I waited until Caleb's hand was no longer touching Savannah's, until my mother had stopped looking for a way to gather the room back into her control. Then I opened the blue folder. The sound of the binder clip coming off was small, but everyone heard it. I passed the copies around the room. One to my father, one to Monica, one to Aunt Beatrice, one to Caleb, one to Claudia, one to Savannah, who took it like the paper might burn her. "This is not an accusation," I said. "It is a review." My father frowned at the title page. "Kendall Family Financial Compliance Review, prepared by Leah M. Kendall." "For God's sake, Leah," he said. "This is your family, not one of your hospital audits." I looked at him. Then maybe it should have been easier to keep clean. No one answered. I turned to the first tab. Section 1. Grandma Eleanor's Education Trust. $52,000 was set aside for me. $52,000 was set aside for Savannah. Equal amounts. Samdat. Sam institution. I pointed to the statements. Savannah's balance remained untouched. Mine went from $52,000 to $31,400 to $0. Monica's mouth tightened. "That money was used when this family needed it." "No," I said. "It was used when Savannah needed it." I turned the next page before she could interrupt. 3 withdrawals. 3 authorization forms. Both of your signatures. The memo line says family education and emergency support. The dates line up with the collapse of Pearl and Pine events. Savannah made a sound, half sob, half protest, but it did not stop me. Section 2. Documented financial support over the last several years. Rent and apartment fees, $58,400. Car lease and insurance, $22,750. Credit card rescues, $33,200. total verified or reasonably supported family assistance to Savannah. $166,350. Howard set his copy down like it had become heavy. You are making us look like criminals. No, Dad, I said. I am making it look documented. Aunt Beatrice removed her glasses and stared at my mother. Her voice was quiet. Eleanor was afraid of this. Monica snapped her head toward her. Stay out of it. But Beatrice did not flinch. I stayed out of it too long. The room held its breath. I turned to the last page. I am not paying for the wedding. I am not signing the sponsor form. I am not covering the deposit. And after today, no one in this room gets to call my bank account family. No one followed me when I picked up Grandma's recipe box and walked to the door. That was the strangest part. For most of my life, someone in that house had always followed me with one more sentence, one more correction, one more reason I should turn around and make everyone comfortable again. This time, there was only the soft click of the latch behind me and the cold air filling my lungs. I stood on the porch for a moment before going to my car. Through the front window, I could see my father sitting with the report open in his lap. My mother was still on the couch, one hand pressed to her throat. Savannah had her face in her hands. Caleb was standing near the fireplace, not beside her anymore, and Claudia was speaking to him quietly. I did not feel victorious. Victory would have been too simple a word for something that hurt that much. What I felt was space. 3 days later, Jocelyn Pike emailed to confirm that my name had been removed from all Harborstone paperwork. No sponsor, no guarantor, no financial responsibility. I saved the email in the review folder and, for the first time that week, slept through the night. Caleb called the following Sunday. He told me the wedding was postponed until Savannah could tell both families the truth without turning it into another performance. Claudia withdrew the 60% offer, not permanently, he said, but until there was a real budget and real honesty attached to it. I thanked him for telling me. That was all. My father emailed 11 days after the meeting. One line. I didn't know how much we had taken from you. I read it at my desk between 2 compliance calls and felt nothing dramatic happen inside me. No collapse. No forgiveness blooming all at once. Just a quiet acknowledgement that he had finally used the word, taken. I did not answer that day. My mother stayed silent. No phone tree, no church ladies, no cousins calling with borrowed outrage. Her silence felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious, but I did not chase it. Savannah texted near the end of January. I don't know how to fix this. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Start by telling the truth without asking me to pay for it. Grandma's recipe box sits on my kitchen shelf now, not hidden in the pantry. Sometimes I open it for the lemon pound cake card. Sometimes I do not open it at all. I just look at it and remember that love can be generous without being blind. Family is not supposed to be an invoice, but when they keep sending bills in your name, you have every right to mark them unpaid. The lesson I took from Leah's story is simple, but it is not easy. Love should never require you to disappear. In many families, the person who complains the least becomes the person everyone expects the most from. The quiet one becomes the backup plan. The responsible one becomes the emergency fund. The forgiving one becomes the place where everyone else leaves their guilt. And because it happens slowly, one favor at a time, one sacrifice at a time, you may not notice the moment love turns into obligation. But real family does not measure your worth by how much you can give. Real love does not put your name on a bill and call it loyalty. Real support does not ask one person to bleed quietly so another person can shine in public. Leah's strength was not that she had records. It was that she finally believed what those records showed her. She stopped explaining away the imbalance. She stopped shrinking her own pain to protect everyone else's comfort. And most importantly, she learned that setting a boundary is not the same as abandoning your family. Sometimes healing does not sound like forgiveness right away. Sometimes it sounds like, no, I will not pay for that. Sometimes it sounds like silence after years of defending yourself. Sometimes it sounds like closing a folder, turning off your phone, and choosing peace over approval. If this story touched something in you, maybe it is because you have been Leah in some version of your own life. Maybe you were the strong one, the dependable one, the one everyone assumed would understand. But strength does not mean unlimited access. Kindness does not mean permission. And family, if it is real, should know the difference between asking for help and taking what was never offered. What would you have done if you were in Leah's place? Would you have exposed the truth at the family meeting, or walked away quietly? Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to know how you see this story. And if this kind of family drama, life lesson, and emotional storytelling speaks to you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for the next story.